The crystalline displays throughout the United Earth Council chamber cast a pale blue glow across Admiral Liwei's face as she studied the towering figures before her. The Kraxan delegation stood nearly 3 meters tall, their iridescent scale armor reflecting fragments of light across the polished marble floors. Any other species might have found their presence intimidating, but Liwei simply adjusted her uniform collar and waited. "Your species has been deemed worthy of evaluation," announced High Commander Vexthor, his translator converting the complex harmonic clicks of his native language into standard Earth English. "We offer you the honor of the ancient trials." A murmur rippled through the assembled council members. The Kraxan Empire had spent the last 3 centuries methodically testing every spacefaring race they encountered. Most failed. Some survived. None had ever truly impressed them. Liwei tapped her datapad, scanning through the preliminary information packet the Kraxans had provided. "Interesting," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Your trials have quite an extensive history, though I notice some inconsistencies in the victory conditions." Vexthor's secondary breathing slits flared, a sign of surprise among his kind. "You wish to discuss rules. Most species at this point are begging for mercy or attempting to flee their solar system." "Admiral," whispered Counselor Santos beside her, "perhaps we should consider their historically peaceful options." Liwei held up a hand, silencing him. "High Commander, your empire has encountered 47 spacefaring civilizations, correct? And of these, 39 chose immediate surrender, 6 attempted resistance, and 2 negotiated limited autonomy agreements. Your intelligence is impressive," Vexthor admitted, his armor plates shifting in what Liwei had learned was their equivalent of discomfort. "What I find more impressive," Liwei continued, standing to her full height, still barely reaching the Kraxan's chest, "is that in all this time, no one has ever simply accepted your challenge at face value." The chamber fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the environmental systems seemed to pause. "You?" Vexthor's translator crackled as it attempted to process his response. "You wish to accept the ancient trials? Willingly?" Liwei smiled, the expression warming her stern features. "High Commander, humanity has spent its entire existence preparing for moments like this. We didn't reach the stars because we were the strongest, fastest, or most advanced species on our planet. We got here because we never stopped trying, learning, and adapting." She gestured to the historical displays lining the chamber walls. Images of early space missions, the first Mars colonies, the deep space expeditions. "Every step of our journey has been a trial. Every achievement came from facing challenges that seemed impossible at first glance." The Kraxan delegation huddled together, their crystalline armor chiming softly as they consulted in their native tongue. Liwei used the moment to send a priority message to her hand-picked team. They had been preparing for something like this since first contact with the Kraxan Empire 3 months ago. Finally, Vexthor turned back to address the chamber. "The trials are designed to test the very limits of biological and technological capability. No single individual could hope to survive them all." "Then it's fortunate," Liwei replied, her datapad displaying profiles of her selected champions, "that humanity's greatest strength has always been working together. We accept your ancient trials, High Commander, though I suspect they may not proceed quite as traditionally as you expect." The Kraxan leader's outer membrane shifted through several shades of blue, a sign of deep cognitive processing. "You understand that failure means immediate vassalage of your species. And you understand," Liwei countered, rising from her seat, "that success means the Kraxan Empire must acknowledge humanity as equals and open full diplomatic relations. Those are the ancient terms, yes." "Then, High Commander," Liwei said, extending her hand in the human gesture of agreement, "I believe we have ourselves a challenge. Though I should warn you, humanity has a long history of exceeding expectations." As the Kraxan delegation processed her words, Liwei's datapad chimed with confirmations from her selected team members. Each message carried the same response: ready to make history. The ancient trials were about to encounter something they had never faced before. Humans who saw them not as a threat, but as an opportunity to demonstrate just what their species could achieve when pushed to their limits. The observation deck of the Luna training facility offered a perfect view of Earth, hanging like a blue jewel in the black velvet of space. Admiral Lai Wei stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching as 4 shuttles approached the station's docking bays. Each carried a potential champion for humanity's upcoming trials. "They're an unusual selection," noted Dr. Chen Ming, the facility's chief training coordinator. He scrolled through the dossiers on his datapad. "The Krexan expected us to send military specialists or enhanced athletes." Lai Wei's lips curved into a slight smile. "The Krexan expect many things, Doctor. That's precisely why they won't be prepared for what we're actually sending them." The first shuttle docked with a gentle hiss of equalizing pressure. Isabella Rodriguez stepped out, her compact frame radiating the quiet confidence of someone who had made the impossible her daily routine. She'd spent the last decade setting records across the solar system, including the first solo climb of Olympus Mons without supplemental oxygen. "Admiral." Isabella nodded, adjusting the gravity compensator on her belt. "I hear you need someone who doesn't understand the meaning of insurmountable." Before Lai Wei could respond, the second shuttle arrived. Raj Patil emerged, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface only he could see through his neural link. At 23, he'd already revolutionized quantum navigation by applying principles from classical Indian music to spacecraft trajectories. "The Krexan combat systems use a base 12 mathematics," he announced without preamble. "It's elegant but predictable, like trying to describe a raga using only whole notes." The third shuttle brought Hikaru Tanaka, her environmental suit bearing the marks of countless deep-sea expeditions. She'd spent more time adapting to extreme pressures than most people spent sleeping, developing techniques that helped humanity colonize the oceanic depths of Europa. "I reviewed the trial environments," Hikaru said, already pulling up simulation data. "They're trying to test our limits, but they don't understand that humans thrive on finding ways around limits." The final shuttle delivered Marco Santos, his hands bearing the calluses of someone who built worlds for a living. He'd orchestrated the construction of habitats in environments that engineering AI had deemed structurally impossible. "Their testing chambers are impressive," he mused, studying the technical specifications, "but they're designed around their own biological assumptions. That's always the first mistake in universal architecture." Lai Wei gathered them in the station's primary briefing room, where a holographic display showed the 8 trial environments they would face. "The Krexan believe these challenges will prove our species' worth through individual excellence," she explained. "They don't understand that humanity's true strength lies in how we combine our skills." Like the early space programs, Isabella noted, examining the high-gravity trial simulation, "No single person got us to the moon. It took thousands working together." Raj nodded, his fingers weaving complex patterns through his personal interface. "Their systems expect linear problem-solving. They're not prepared for human lateral thinking. Or for how we adapt," Hikaru added. "Every solution we develop builds on centuries of accumulated human experience." Marco was already sketching designs in the air. "We can use that. Each trial becomes a foundation for the next, just like how we built the Mars colonies." Lai Wei watched as her chosen team naturally fell into collaborative planning. The Krexan expected to see 4 individuals attempting to overcome impossible challenges. Instead, they would witness something far more impressive: humanity's talent for turning individual skills into collective innovation. "The first trial begins in 3 days," she announced. "The Krexan think they're testing our species' capabilities. Instead, we're going to show them something they've never seen before: how humans turn trials into opportunities." As her team dove into preparation, Lai Wei sent a message to the waiting Krexan observers: "We're ready to begin whenever you are." She knew they expected fear, or at least nervousness. Instead, her team radiated something the Krexan had never encountered in their trials before: genuine excitement at the challenges ahead. The ancient trials were about to get their first lesson in human adaptability, and Lai Wei had selected the perfect teachers for the job. The surface of Nexus 7 gleamed like polished obsidian under its binary suns. Isabella Rodriguez stood at the starting line, her specialized suit adapting to the crushing 3.2G environment. Around her, the Kraxen's enhanced warriors towered in their crystalline armor, their breathing steady in the dense atmosphere. Final equipment check. Raj's voice came through her earpiece, calm and methodical. The suit's quantum field is holding steady. Hikaru's atmospheric modifications are running at optimal levels. Isabella rolled her shoulders, feeling the weight of the world trying to pull her down. Marco's joint support system. Perfectly calibrated, Marco himself answered. Remember, the suit will channel the gravity's force through the enhanced structural points, just like climbing Olympus Mons, but with better company. High Commander Vexthor's voice boomed across the starting area. The first trial tests pure physical endurance. You will traverse 20 kilometers across the obsidian plains. In this gravity, most species can barely walk. Our champions train for years to run it. Isabella smiled behind her visor. With all respect, Commander, humans have been running since before we invented writing. We never really stopped. The Kraxen observers shifted uncomfortably as she began her warm-up routine. The movements were ancient, stretches developed by runners thousands of years ago in Earth's great savannas. Her suit whispered and adjusted, Marco's design working in perfect harmony with her body's natural mechanics. They're calculating a 40% chance he'll make it halfway, Raj commented, monitoring the Kraxen's data feeds. Their models don't account for human persistence hunting techniques. Then let's give them some new data to analyze, Isabella replied as the starting signal pulsed across the obsidian plain. The Kraxen champions burst forward with engineered power, their crystalline forms blurring with speed. Isabella set off at what appeared to be a casual jog, her movements smooth and measured. The observers waited for her to falter under the crushing gravity. Instead, she began to sing. Maintaining optimal oxygen levels, Hikaru reported as Isabella's voice carried an old mountain song across the comm channel. The rhythmic breathing pattern is working perfectly with the atmospheric regulators. 1 kilometer passed, then 3. The Kraxen champions maintained their blistering pace, but Isabella noticed their steps becoming less precise. 5 kilometers in, she passed the first one who had burned out, their crystalline armor dulled with exhaustion. They're starting to understand, Marco noted, watching the Kraxen observers' reactions. Their warriors are built for explosive power. They never considered the efficiency of slow-twitch muscle adaptation. 8 kilometers, another Kraxen champion faltered. Isabella adjusted her gait slightly, implementing techniques perfected by ultramarathon runners on Earth. Her song shifted to an ancient Andean rhythm, matched perfectly to her cadence. Their scientists are going crazy with the readings, Raj chuckled. They can't comprehend how you're maintaining homeostasis through music and motion alone. At the 12-kilometer mark, Isabella passed the lead Kraxen warrior. She didn't sprint by or make any show of superiority. Instead, she nodded respectfully and offered, "Would you like to run together? I can teach you some breathing techniques." The warrior's translator crackled with confusion, but they fell into step beside her. Isabella began explaining the principles of persistent hunting, of using gravity and momentum rather than fighting them. By the 15-kilometer mark, 3 more Kraxen champions had joined their impromptu running clinic. "This is unprecedented," High Commander Vexthor's voice carried traces of awe. The trial was meant to prove superiority through victory. "With respect, Commander," Isabella replied, her pace never faltering. "Humans learned long ago that the greatest victory is turning competitors into collaborators." She crossed the finish line surrounded by Kraxen warriors, all moving in rhythm to her ancient mountain song. The observers rushed forward not to declare a winner, but to learn how a species could turn a test of brutal endurance into a lesson in collective achievement. In the observation deck, Admiral Lai Wei smiled. The first trial had demonstrated more than human endurance. It had shown the Kraxan a completely new way of thinking about victory itself. The quantum simulation chamber hummed with potential as Raj Patel settled into the neural interface chair. Around him, holographic displays flickered with base 12 calculations, their alien mathematics dancing like fireflies in the dimmed room. Their battle computer has never been defeated, High Commander Vex Thor announced, his scales reflecting the quantum calculations. It processes combat scenarios using the combined tactical knowledge of 1,000 generations. Raj adjusted his neural link, fingers moving through familiar patterns. Impressive. Though I notice its architecture is based on crystal lattice computing. Beautiful structure, but rather rigid in its thinking patterns. Isabella's voice came through his earpiece. Remember how we adapted my running rhythms to your quantum formulas? Already integrating them. Raj smiled, watching as the simulation space materialized around him. The challenge was deceptively simple. Navigate a fleet through an impossible defense grid while countering the computer's attacks. The Kraxan observers leaned forward as their system initiated the first sequence. Perfect geometric patterns of defense satellites bloomed across the tactical display, their firing solutions forming mathematically precise killing fields. Raj's first move surprised everyone. He scattered his fleet into seemingly random positions, breaking every known formation in military doctrine. The Kraxan computer paused, its crystalline processors attempting to calculate the tactical advantage of such chaos. What you're seeing, Raj explained casually as he worked, is based on the flight patterns of hummingbirds, Earth's smallest birds, yet they can fly in any direction, even backwards. Marco chimed in through the comm. Just like how we designed those maintenance drones for the Mars orbital platforms. The battle computer launched its counterattack, perfect lines of energy weapons slicing through space. But Raj's ships moved like those ancient birds, each following its own pattern while maintaining harmony with the whole. Where the computer expected linear retreat, it found spiral advancement. Where it calculated perfect intercept points, ships dance through impossible gaps. Your ships cannot maintain such irregular movements, Vex Thor protested. The energy requirements are actually minimal, Raj completed, his fingers never stopping their dance. When you work with natural patterns instead of against them, efficiency follows. Watch. He began humming a classical raga, its ancient rhythms informing his tactical decisions. The Kraxan observers were startled to see their computer's efficiency ratings suddenly drop as it tried to compute increasingly complex scenarios. He's integrating musical mathematics with quantum battlefield topology, Hikaru realized, watching the patterns emerge. Just like how water finds the path of least resistance. The battle computer deployed its most sophisticated algorithms, transforming the battlefield into a geometric maze of overlapping fire zones. Raj responded by implementing what he called the monsoon protocol, his ships flowing through the defenses like wind-driven rain, unpredictable yet perfectly coordinated. Impossible, one of the Kraxan scientists muttered. The computational complexity is actually quite elegant, Raj interrupted, still humming. Your computer thinks in perfect crystal structures. Nature prefers fractals and flowing patterns. Sometimes the best solutions aren't the most obvious ones. As his fleet danced through the final defense grid, Raj added a flourish, his ships briefly forming the shape of a blooming lotus before settling into their final positions. The simulation ended with the battle computer logging its first defeat in 3 centuries. But how did you predict the computer's responses? Vex Thor demanded. I didn't, Raj answered, disconnecting from the neural interface. I simply created patterns flexible enough to adapt to whatever it did. Sometimes the best strategy isn't about predicting every move, but being ready to flow with any possibility. The Kraxan scientists crowded around his terminal, their questions tumbling over each other. How had he integrated musical mathematics with quantum warfare? Could these principles be applied to other systems? Admiral Li Wei's voice came through the comm, carrying a note of pride. Perhaps you'd be willing to give our Kraxan colleagues a lesson in algorithmic improvisation." Raj was already bringing up his teaching modules, complete with simulations of Earth's hummingbirds in flight. "The best victories," he said, "are the ones that leave everyone knowing more than when they started." As the Kraxan scientists settled in for their lesson, their battle computer began processing something new. The realization that perfect order wasn't always the path to perfect solutions. The pressure chamber on a Kraxan testing facility loomed before Hikaru Tanaka like a metallic cocoon. Through its transparent sections, she could see the specialized liquid environment designed to simulate the crushing depths of gas-giant oceans. Even the Kraxan warriors looked uneasy as their instruments displayed the steadily rising pressure readings. "The chamber replicates conditions found at the bottom of Kepler 138, High Commander Vexthor explained. "No unmodified being has survived more than 10 minutes of exposure." Hikaru ran her hand along her streamlined pressure suit, a design that incorporated principles learned from deep-sea creatures on Earth. "Interesting. Though I notice you're focusing on surviving the pressure rather than adapting to it." Isabella's voice crackled through her comm. "Just like those months you spent studying the Beja sea nomads." "Exactly," Hikaru smiled, performing her final equipment check. "Humans learned long ago that the body can adapt to almost anything if you give it the right tools and training." The entry procedure began, flooding the chamber with the high-density liquid. Hikaru's suit sensors came alive, feeding data to both her team and the Kraxan observers. As the pressure increased, she began the breathing exercises developed by generations of pearl divers. "Her heart rate is actually decreasing," one of the Kraxan scientists noted with disbelief. "And her oxygen consumption is far below predicted levels." Raj's voice joined the conversation. "She's implementing the techniques we developed for the Europa exploration teams. Watch how she moves." Instead of fighting against the crushing pressure, Hikaru flowed with it. Her movements became deliberate and graceful, mimicking the efficiency of deep-sea creatures. The Kraxan observers crowded around their monitors as she began deploying specialized equipment. "What we learned in Earth's oceans," she explained while working, "is that adaptation isn't about being the strongest. It's about understanding your environment and becoming part of it." Marco chimed in. "The suit's structural design is based on her research into sperm whale anatomy. They dive deeper than any other mammal on Earth." The pressure continued to build, passing levels that would normally flatten unprotected material. Hikaru remained focused, setting up a small but efficient workspace in the hostile environment. Her movements became a demonstration in conservation of energy. "Notice how she's using the pressure itself to assist with equipment deployment," Raj pointed out to the fascinated Kraxan scientists. "Similar to how deep-sea vents create natural energy currents." Hikaru began humming an old Japanese diving song, its rhythm matching her controlled breathing. The sound carried clearly through the dense liquid, creating patterns that the Kraxan instruments frantically recorded. "The vibrations," one scientist exclaimed. "They're actually helping to stabilize the pressure differentials. Sound travels differently in water," Hikaru explained between verses. "Ancient human cultures knew this long before we had the science to explain why. Would you like me to demonstrate some other techniques?" The Kraxan observers, who had come to document a survival test, found themselves taking notes on everything from biomimicry to cultural preservation. Hikaru turned the hostile environment into a classroom, teaching principles that the Kraxan's advanced technology had never considered. "Your species," Vexthor observed, "seems to have a peculiar habit of turning challenges into teaching opportunities." "That's because we learned early on," Hikaru replied while adjusting her equipment. "That knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. Watch this next demonstration carefully. It shows how we adapted deep-sea bioluminescence for communication." As the pressure reached its maximum level, Hikaru's workspace had transformed into a functional deep-sea research station. The Kraxan's impossible survival test had become a practical lesson in environmental adaptation. Admiral Li Wei's voice carried a note of satisfaction over the comm. Perhaps we should discuss establishing the joint deep-sea research program with our Craxan colleagues. The chamber that was meant to test limits had instead become a bridge between species, proving once again that humanity's greatest strength lay not in mere survival, but in turning hostile environments into opportunities for growth and understanding. The construction bay of the Craxan testing facility stretched out before Marco Santos like a blank canvas. Floating platforms held an array of advanced building materials, while holographic projectors displayed the seemingly impossible structure he was expected to create. A self-sustaining habitat designed to withstand the chaotic environment of a neutron star's corona. Our finest architects deemed this challenge impossible, High Commander Vexthor stated, gesturing at the swirling simulation of stellar forces. The energy fluctuations make standard construction methods useless. Marco ran his hands over a piece of metamaterial, feeling its atomic structure respond to his touch. Interesting approach to the problem, he mused. Though I notice you're trying to resist the stellar forces rather than work with them. Raj's voice came through his earpiece. Reminds me of those old solar temples you showed me, the ones that used light and shadow as structural elements. Exactly, Marco smiled, already sketching designs in the air with his holographic interface. Sometimes the most advanced solutions come from our oldest understanding of natural forces. The Craxan observers watched with curiosity as Marco began arranging materials in what appeared to be a chaotic pattern. Instead of following their prescribed construction methods, he created a series of interconnected shapes that seemed to flow into each other. The basic principle, he explained while working, comes from ancient Incan architecture. They built structures that could dance with earthquakes instead of fighting them. We're going to apply that same thinking to stellar forces. Hikaru's voice added, just like how deep-sea creatures use pressure gradients to their advantage. The habitat began to take shape, but not in the rigid crystalline form the Craxan expected. Marco's design incorporated spirals and curves, each section flowing smoothly into the next. The metamaterials responded to his touch as if they understood his intent. Your design lacks the traditional reinforcement patterns, one Craxan engineer noted with concern. The energy waves will tear it apart. Marco's fingers danced through the holographic controls, adjusting quantum fields with precise movements. Watch what happens when the first wave hits. The structure doesn't just resist, it breathes. As the simulation unleashed its first stellar surge, the habitat shifted and flexed. Energy that should have torn through shields was instead guided through the curved surfaces, feeding back into the structure's power systems. He's using the principles of ancient Japanese earthquake-resistant pagodas, Isabella observed, combined with modern quantum field manipulation. The Craxan engineers crowded closer as Marco demonstrated how each element of his design served multiple purposes. Structural supports doubled as energy collectors. Waste processing systems mimicked the efficiency of forest ecosystems. Even the living spaces were arranged in patterns that promoted both physical and psychological well-being. Your species builds as if the structure is alive, Vexthor remarked, watching as the habitat adapted to another energy surge. In a way, it is, Marco replied, fine-tuning a particularly elegant curve. The best human architecture has always understood that buildings need to grow and change with their inhabitants. Here, let me show you something fascinating about how we use these principles in the Mercury solar observation posts. The construction challenge transformed into an impromptu masterclass in adaptive architecture. Craxan engineers who came to judge found themselves taking notes on everything from ancient earth-building techniques to the latest applications of quantum engineering. The remarkable thing, Marco explained while demonstrating a particularly clever energy redistribution system, is how often our latest innovations draw inspiration from solutions nature developed billions of years ago. Admiral Li Wei's voice carried a hint of pride. Perhaps we should discuss establishing a joint architectural institute. There seems to be much our species could learn from each other. As the habitat simulation continued to dance with stellar forces that should have destroyed it, the Craxan observers began to understand something fundamental about human engineering. True innovation often meant finding harmony between the ancient and the advanced, between resistance and adaptation. The construction bay had become more than a testing ground. It was now a bridge between two species' understanding of how to build for the future, while honoring the wisdom of the past. The combined trial chamber was a masterpiece of Craxan engineering, a massive space that could simulate multiple hostile environments simultaneously. Today, it would test not just individual skills, but the human team's ability to work together under impossible conditions. The final trials were designed to be insurmountable, High Commander Vex Thor announced, his voice carrying a mix of anticipation and curiosity. Each zone presents a different challenge, all of which must be overcome simultaneously. The human team stood together at the entrance, their specialized equipment modifications reflecting their previous victories. Isabella adjusted her gravity compensators, while Raj fine-tuned their quantum communication network. Hikaru checked their environmental systems as Marco made final adjustments to their mobile shelter design. "Remember the street dancers in Rio?" Isabella said, smiling at her teammates. How they could improvise together without speaking. Raj nodded, his fingers already moving through preliminary calculations, complex patterns emerging from simple interactions, like quantum entanglement, but with human intuition. The chamber activated, transforming into a multi-layered nightmare. One section became a high-gravity zone with toxic atmosphere, another simulated deep space conditions, while a third crackled with electromagnetic storms that threatened to fry any electronics. At the center, a quantum maze pulsed with challenge protocols. "Begin your attempts," Vex Thor commanded, expecting the team to split up and fail individually. Instead, they moved as one. Isabella took point, her enhanced running techniques creating safe pathways through the gravity wells. Behind her, Hikaru's environmental adaptations protected them all, while Marco's mobile shelter design shifted and flowed around them like a living thing. Raj's quantum calculations guided their every step, turning hostile energy fields into navigational advantages. "They're not just cooperating," one Craxan scientist observed in wonder. "They're amplifying each other's capabilities." When electromagnetic pulses threatened their equipment, Marco's architectural principles redirected the energy through patterns inspired by lightning rods. As radiation levels spiked, Hikaru's deep-sea pressure adaptations protected their bodies. Isabella's endurance techniques kept them moving while Raj transformed hostile quantum fields into communication channels. "Watch how they move." Admiral Lei Wei's voice came through the observation speakers. "Each action supports the others. No wasted energy, no isolated efforts." The Craxan observers were transfixed as the human team transformed the chamber's challenges into opportunities. Where the gravity tried to crush them, they used its force to power their movements. When radiation threatened to overwhelm their shields, they adapted it into sensor data. "It's like watching a dance," one young Craxan engineer remarked. "But every move serves multiple purposes." "Traditional human martial arts," Isabella explained between careful steps. "The principle of using an opponent's strength to your advantage. Would you like us to demonstrate some other techniques?" Even in the middle of the supposedly impossible trial, the team continued their pattern of teaching. They explained their methods, shared their insights, and invited the Craxan to understand not just what they were doing, but why it worked. "Their success rate is beyond our measuring capabilities," a Craxan scientist reported, their scales shifting in excitement. "They're not just surviving the challenges. They're rewriting the rules of how they work." As the team approached the chamber's central challenge, a quantum lock that no single being could decode, they demonstrated the culmination of their approach. Instead of trying to solve it directly, they created a resonance between their various techniques. Isabella's rhythmic movements, Hikaru's pressure waves, Marco's structural harmonics, and Raj's quantum calculations combined to make the lock simply melt away. "Impossible," Vex Thor whispered, but his voice carried admiration rather than disbelief. "No," Admiral Lei Wei corrected gently. This is what happens when you let go of thinking in terms of individual excellence and embrace the power of true collaboration. Each person's strength becomes everyone's strength. The chamber powered down, but the lesson it taught continued to resonate. The Kraxan had created a trial to test the limits of individual capability. Instead, they had witnessed something far more valuable. A demonstration of how differences could become advantages when people work together in harmony. The grand chamber of the Kraxan flagship glowed with crystalline light as Admiral Lai Wei stood before the assembled Council of Elders. The human team, Isabella, Raj, Hikaru, and Marco, flanked her, their presence a testament to everything they had achieved. High Commander Vexthor approached the central platform, his scales shifting through colors that reflected deep thought. In all our history, Vexthor began, his translator carefully conveying each nuance, no species has ever completed the ancient trials as you have. But more significantly, none has ever transformed them as you did. Lai Wei nodded respectfully, perhaps because you were looking for the wrong things all along. The trials tested for supremacy, but humanity's strength has never been about being supreme. The council chamber hummed with murmured discussions as holographic displays showed highlights from each trial. Isabella's endurance run, where she taught Kraxan warriors about persistence. Raj's quantum battle, which became a lesson in adaptive mathematics. Hikaru's pressure chamber demonstration that revolutionized their deep-sea research. Marco's living architecture that bridged ancient wisdom with future technology. We designed these trials, one elder spoke, to find species worthy of joining our empire. Yet you have shown us that perhaps it is we who need to evolve. Isabella stepped forward, her voice carrying across the chamber. Every human achievement came from learning from others. Even our earliest ancestors understood that sharing knowledge makes everyone stronger. Raj added, "Your crystal computing is beautiful in its perfection. But nature teaches us that true resilience comes from embracing imperfection, allowing for adaptation and growth." The Kraxan scientists who had observed their trials brought forward a startling revelation. Detailed scans showing how centuries of genetic engineering had locked their species into rigid patterns of thought and behavior. Their quest for perfection had become a kind of prison. "We see now," Vexthor said, "that what we thought was a test of worthiness was actually an opportunity for transformation. Your team didn't just complete our trials. You showed us possibilities we had forgotten existed." Hikaru shared a glance with her teammates before speaking. In Earth's oceans, we learned that the most successful species aren't the strongest or most specialized. They're the ones that can adapt, that can form relationships with others. Marco gestured to the architectural plans already being shared between their species. Every structure we build is designed to grow, to change, to incorporate new ideas. Perhaps it's time for both our peoples to build something together. The Council of Elders rose as one, their crystalline forms catching the light. "We propose these trials to judge your species' worth," the chief elder announced. "Instead, you have given us something far more valuable. A way forward." Lai Wei smiled, thinking of how far they had come from that first challenging moment in the Earth Council chamber. "Then let us begin as we mean to continue. Not as superior and inferior, not as teacher and student, but as equals with much to learn from each other." The formal declaration that followed wasn't just a recognition of humanity's success or an invitation to join the Kraxan Empire. Instead, it was something unprecedented. A proposal for a new kind of partnership, one based on mutual growth and shared discovery. As the human team prepared to return home, they found themselves surrounded by Kraxan scientists, engineers, and warriors, not seeking to challenge them now, but eager to begin learning and sharing. The trials that were meant to test humanity's worth had instead revealed worth in every species' ability to change and grow. "You know," Isabella remarked to her teammates as they watched Kraxan engineers excitedly discussing modifications to their pressure suits, when they called for battle, "I don't think this is the kind of struggle they had in mind." "Perhaps," Admiral Lai Wei replied, watching as ancient barriers between species dissolved like morning mist. This was the most important battle of all, the struggle to overcome our own limitations and find strength in our differences. The Craxan Empire had sought to test humanity's worthiness for inclusion. Instead, humanity had shown them that true worth lies not in proving superiority, but in helping everyone rise together.